Hi, Clodagh. So Nathan McDonnell had justice delayed for another week, but we heard an awful lot of detail that we hadn't heard before, both about his involvement in the criminal conspiracy to export this huge shipment of crystal meth, and also probably for the first time, some of his motivations for why he got involved, including the fact that his much heralded business was in quite a lot of trouble. So tell us what happened today. It was a sentencing hearing, but you just didn't get to that final point, I suppose.
Yeah, so it was due to be a sentencing hearing, and this was before the Special Criminal Court today. It looks like the sentencing will go ahead in the next couple of weeks. The judges just wanted some final information about his businesses. So near the end of the hearing, I suppose during mitigation, and actually I suppose throughout most of the evidence heard today, there was a lot of details given about his business. In particular, the judges had asked what I suppose the position was in relation to his current companies and his associate companies. So this is the Ballyseeding Garden Centre. And Mr. Bowman for the defence for Nathan McDonnell said that the companies weren't in full receivership at the moment, but he did say that they were on it. The company was on its last legs. He said, as he understood, it had been scaled down, but there was one facility, one of his businesses was still operating, and the judges just asked him to sort of submit something more substantial and more up to date about those businesses because they wanted to determine whether or not he would have a business to return to running when his sentence was finished. But yeah, today evidence was given by, I suppose, the detective sergeant who was in charge of the investigation, and mostly around Nathan McDonnell's involvement, why he got involved with this shipment. Like you said, it was one of the biggest almost exportations of crystal meth in the country, in the history of the state. And we heard a lot about how he got involved, the characters that were involved, I suppose, in it as well, and what his motivations were for it.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously Nathan McDonnell is before the courts. People will know of him, but the basic charge is for drug importation and facilitating an organized crime gang. And the value of the crystal meth, which is, a very toxic and dangerous drug. I think we actually had a final valuation, did we, today, of just over 32 million.
Yeah, so they said that there was 540 kilograms of the drug, which was valued at around €60 per gram. And that brought the total to over 32 million, so 32,418,000 euros worth of the drug.
Yeah, so they went into, I suppose, Nathan McDonnell's involvement because obviously this drugs were found in a piece of equipment really that was on a container ship in County Cork. So they gave details of how well hidden that was anyway as well, didn't they?
Yeah, so I suppose they began by talking about Nathan McDonnell. He had actually, at district court level, was willing to sign guilty pleas, but they couldn't be facilitated in the district court. However, the DPP did say that they accepted those, and eventually, when he was brought before the Special Criminal Court, those pleas were entered and accepted. So we heard details about the 15th of February 2024, which is almost a year ago now, and that was the day that the piece of machinery was uncovered by customs officers in Cork. Now, they were operating on intel. We heard today there was a load inspected by way of X-ray at the port of Cork, and there was some anomalies discovered. The X-ray had showed that there was a sort of a drum within the machine, and this drum had some inconsistencies. And as a result of that, custom officers, with the assistance of some workmen, drilled some holes using an angle grinder in the machine. And it said that they took them a number of hours across 2 days to get full access to the machine. And pictures of this were shown to the judge. Within the machine, there was cables cut, so it wasn't really a functional machine. And we'd later hear a bit more about the particulars about the buying and selling of this machine, but essentially it was meant to be a machine for recycling scrap metal. And within the machine, there was plastic bags found with a white substance inside, and these substances were later analysed, and it was found to be methamphetamine. And like we said, it was 540 kilograms of the drug. When that interception took place by customs, at this point, An Garda Síochána were able to make further applications for search warrants. The detective agreed that it didn't actually come to a surprise to him that this amount of drugs was found in this shipment, because he said he was conducting an ongoing investigation into an organised criminal group that was in Kerry. And there was a named individual who I suppose we're going to call maybe Mr. X. He was not named at all during this hearing because he is before the Special Criminal Court and is awaiting trial. But they did say, as part of this, I suppose, hearing today, sentencing hearing, we heard a lot about the structure of the gang and their operations.
And as part of that then, obviously, when we first wrote about them, we described them as kind of an offshoot or cell of the Sinaloa Cartel, which is Mexico's, I suppose, most notorious and arguably the world's most infamous drug cartel based in Mexico and formerly run by El Chapo Guzman. So an amazing story. Did the police get into that? Did the guards speak about those sort of international connections?
Yeah, they did. So they described the scale of this gang's operations. He said that they were a transnational organised crime group. And in terms of the structure, he said that there was various cells across the globe, but he said that there was in particular a logistical cell in Kerry. He said that the activities associated with this OCG included drug trafficking, money laundering, assault, and the intimidation of witnesses. He said that this particular gang are in domestic in their origins, but they do have connections with the Sinaloa Cartel in Mexico, which was described in court as one of the biggest drug cartels in the world. Who said, their reach is across continents, across the globe, and their particular activities include drug trafficking and murder and the other sort of activities that you would associate with the Sinaloa Cartel. As part of that, then, I suppose he went on to describe Nathan McDonnell's business interests and his involvement with this. He said that Ballyseedy Garden Centre, which Nathan McDonnell was the CEO of, was an intergenerational company that has been on the go for over 50 years. So 3 generations of the McDonnell family have run this business down through the years, and Nathan McDonnell in particular has been involved since 2005. Has been described as a well-established and very respectable business in Kerry. As part of the Ballyseedy Garden Centre, there is also some retail stores and a restaurant, and it was described as a small to medium organisation in scale. Now, information regarding the dispatch of that particular machine in Cork Harbour, that linked back to the Ballyseedy Garden Centre, and combining this with the information that the Gardaí already had about the OCG, they were able to then do a search of a premises in Listowel. So information regarding that machine in Cork, and that then obviously been linked back to Ballyseedy Garden Centre, that combined with the kind of the knowledge that the Gardaí already had, meant that they were able to do a search of a premises in Listowel. This home was essentially owned, it was described, by Mr. X, but his name wasn't on the title deeds. When Gardaí searched the home, that man was present. During the search, there was 5 mobile phones, a passport, they said, with multiple stamps, which indicated to them that there had been frequent international travel, as well as some spent SIM cards that were found that were seized. That frequent international travel, as well as the appearance of the property, indicated to Gardaí that Mr. X had easy access to a lot of money, but it was described in court that he hadn't made any filings of taxes to revenue. And I'm not sure if that meant that these were recent tax filings, there was none recently, or there was none ever made, and he was not in receipt of any social welfare either. On the phones, they found some encrypted communication apps, and Garda Síochána had full access to that messaging history. And in particular, they had found communications between Mr. X and a user named Sam, who they described as somebody having a Polish phone number. He said that they were this Sam person was based in Spain, and dating back to April 2013, he had been in communication with Mr. X regarding their intent to import, quote, powder from Mexico. And it was stated as well that the Sam person had connections to the Sinaloa Cartel. Now, in those conversations between April and May in 2023, there was an address provided, an email address provided, and this email address was associated to Ballyseedy Garda Centre. However, the court heard that this information wasn't being mentioned in court for any other reason, only to give context, because they wanted to assert that Mr. Nathan McDonnell wasn't involved in the communication at all. He's pleaded guilty to facilitating a criminal organisation and not directing one, but it's just that it was just to show that his email address and what stage of, I suppose, the communications, his email address or an email address relating to Ballyseedy Garden Centres had been exchanged between the two. We did hear as well that Nathan McDonnell was not involved in any sort of encrypted communication. He met with Mr. X in the garden centre very publicly. There was some CCTV images which we can go through, which show them together. He used his own email address to make an invoice, which we'll also go through. And it was sort of very much, iterated that he was not involved in any of these sort of conversations about this powder.
So I suppose you see they're making a distinction that he wasn't, sourcing drugs or anything like that from the Mexican cartel. However, he has been charged and pled guilty to facilitating an organised crime gang because he wasn't solely just somebody who was paid to store the drugs there. He obviously facilitated this crime gang by basically doing paperwork and obviously the drugs are in this piece of machinery which was destined for Australia. And why Nathan McDonnell has got in, like he would have been in trouble anyway with that seizure of that amount of drugs. But the extra bit of trouble he's got in is that he facilitated the attempted exportation of these drugs.
Yeah. And I suppose in the detailing of how, it got to a point where this piece of machinery was on a ship ready to go it was, bound for Australia. There was a lot of information given about the logistics around that. So there was a business discussed today called Malting Investments Limited. And now this company was set up for legitimate purposes and it was used for legitimate business dealings. It was used for, I believe, purchasing property in Cork. There was nothing untoward about it. And then a man named John McGrath, who is now deceased, joined this company and as part of this was given access to their accounts. John McGrath then said that, so he was basically trying to rent a space from a company called Hennessy Engineering. So he was trying to rent a space to store machinery. He had said that he wanted to start up a scrap recycling business, and he wanted to import machinery to do this, and he was looking for space to store said machinery. Now, Hennessy Engineering, they had their suspicions sort of piqued by John McGrath because he said that this man didn't really know anything about the industry. He didn't really have any knowledge of the, I suppose, the way it works, the ins and outs of it. So they decided not to proceed doing business with him. At this point, when this fell through, Mr. X told Sam that he was having difficulty with one of their routes for getting the powder into the EU. And at this point, they were kind of discussing the alternative routes. And that's where Ballyseedy came in. Now, McGrath had sort of, after this had fell through, he set up a website for his investment for Malting Investments. And he, as part of this, he referenced scrap metal recycling to sort of, he was said today in court, to kind of lend an ear to the idea that this was a legitimate business. And he also registered a Gmail address, which was made to look like a cubby associated with Hennessy Engineering. So as part of this, there was then a lot of, I suppose, back and forth with Nathan McDonnell and Mr. X, who, like I said, is facing charges for the Special Criminal Court. And they had met in person. The named individual, Mr. X, had directed Mr. McGrath, who is John McGrath, to organise finances in the sum of €40,000 to be transferred from Malton Investments Limited to Mexico. So this was to pay Mexico for those drugs that was going to be dispatched onwards. We heard a little bit about the route as well that machine took coming into the country. So it had been dispatched from Central America. It went to Antwerp, which then went to the UK and then to Cork. Once the container got to Cork and it cleared customs, this was in October 2023, it was then brought to Ballyseedy Garden Centre. It was taken and it was placed in a warehouse. It was put in kind of this storage unit that was in plain view, basically. It wasn't cordoned off to the public or anything like that. And this area in particular was covered by the garden centre's CCTV. So it's at this point in October 2023, so about 5 months before Nathan McDonnell and this machine was intercepted in Cork Harbour. So that it's a 5-month long process, I suppose, from them getting it to then it being shipped off again, or attempting to ship it off again. So he got involved basically at this point to try and broker the shipping of the machine to Australia. So they kind of hit a stumbling block, and it was described as they would need what was called an Australian business number, which was described to the court as sort of like a VAT number. And without this, they couldn't send the machine to Australia. Obviously, the value of it, sending something like that without this Australian business number might raise some eyebrows. So at this point, it was Nathan McDonnell's job to try and seek a legitimate ABN to have the item shipped. And at this point, he said that he had to fall back onto his network of friends and family. If somebody in his family knew somebody with a company in Australia that would be willing to provide their ABN, and I think they were offered at something between €2,500 and €5,000 for the use of that ABN. So the machinery arrived into Cork. There was shipping charges to be paid in it. So I think there was like 1,600 due in customs, and that was paid by Mr. McDonnell. It was then taken to the Ballyseedy Garden Centre. This Australian business number was obtained. There was documents put together to allow the shipment of the machine, and of course the drugs inside to Australia. Now there was no cover invoice from Malton's investments. So these were Malton investments were sort of the front used for the entire thing. So Mr. McDonnell had to create a false invoice to be sent over.
So this is where he gets himself in a lot of trouble, I suppose, is that, he and I think it has been said he didn't know what was in it or how much was in it. But clearly he knew there was something was amiss and that something sketchy was going on, to say the least. Presumably he knew was drug related. And so he's facilitated this and helped organise it and helped it happen, provided a fake invoice, got the number. All of that is going to be, I suppose, stand against him. Now, did the guards, obviously the guards are giving this evidence, did they give any evidence about what he knew, what he thought was in it, what he said he thought was in it, or what his motivation for becoming involved in this whole situation was?
Yeah, so, his story changed as the Garda interviews went on. So he had a number of interviews. There was over 200 pages of interviews given in evidence as part of the sentencing. And it seems like initially he had said in Garda interviews that he himself had inspected this piece of machinery, that it was something that was going to be used for a food business in Australia. He said that it looked all good, everything was fine by it was in working order, whereas in fact, turns out that it wasn't in working order at all. There was wires cut, there was things like that. It never kind of would have been usable ever again. And we also heard that the machine was inspected basically by somebody who was an expert in machinery and stuff like that. And he had said that this type of machine would be used by mines. So there would be a small number of mines, such as Tara mines, that might use a machine like this, but because of the scale of it, it would pose a lot of danger and it would actually require a lot of power to run it. He said that it would actually need a substation to run it because it would require such, an input of energy, and they'd even need to have the ESB involved and everything like that. But the machine just wasn't functional at all. And as part of this, we heard more so in mitigation, how Nathan McDonnell got involved in this is basically, he said his business was on its knees. Mr. X had known him as a customer to Ballyseedy Garden Centre, and Mr. X had sort of seen this vulnerability in him that he owed, I think, over 4 million between owing money to revenue, owing money to creditors on loans. There was a member of staff who said that at times they would get their pay slip on a Friday, but they weren't sure that they were ever actually going to receive their money. There was people who hadn't been paid, so his business was in dire straits.
Yeah, which is a very different view of the business than the public would have had up until this point, because he was kind of fated as a sort of local business hero, I suppose, that had kind of brought this, that modernized this family business and turned it into a really successful modern sort of establishment. And he'd appeared obviously in on TV speaking about his business acumen and what he sold. So it's just funny that this is going on underneath, and certainly the public weren't aware of it.
Definitely not. And he was even described in court today as somebody who didn't really have business acumen. He wasn't somebody who was very well organized. While he obviously was the CEO of this company, he wasn't somebody with specific education or qualifications in business management that would have made it easier for him to maybe manage these things. And like you said, he had, this big garden centre. He had all these other restaurant Smash Burger. Was actually looking at opening another franchise elsewhere. He had a contract at this point with Dairygold. It was something that I suppose his father in some sort of there was obviously mitigation. There was some character references given into the court today. And as part of that, we heard that he had sort of made a lot of investments or taken out a lot of loans, during the boom. But sort of when COVID hit, this was kind of it for the company. Like, they really suffered during COVID. But additionally to that, we also heard that during COVID, the kitchen that was in the garden centre within the restaurant there was actually used as part of the Meals on Wheels and provided over 4,000 free dinners to vulnerable individuals within the community. His community ties were reiterated over and over again about how well respected he was, how well known he was. He was involved in raising money for various charities. He was involved in sports. He was very involved in the community. He has, 3 sons, and it kind of spoke about how his reputation has been ruined. He's been sort of deemed as like a toxic part of the community now. He'll never be able to rehabilitate his image, and he's brought nothing but shame and stigma on his immediate family. And he had said that everything is kind of turned around from now. It's very much the opposite of what he sort of was before all of this happened.
And we also heard a bit about his life in prison, didn't he? Where there was testimonials, I think, given from the prison staff describing him as a model prisoner. And we did hear also that some of which we don't always hear of his kind of acceptance of his own deeds. He didn't attempt to justify them beyond explaining he was in financial difficulty.
Yeah. Obviously, he accepted that he had sort of gotten involved with a shady character, somebody who was, this Mr. X has sort of been described as somebody who was very dangerous, very intimidating. As part of his involvement in the OCG, they would sort of operate by, I suppose, threatening personal violence on other people, and that's how they would sort of conduct their business. And Mr. McDonnell was described as being a cog in the machine, but not exactly the machine, as part of this drug importation. He had no monetary interest in the drugs that was in the machine like that, like you said. And it was described that this was having really, catastrophic impact on his personal life and even onto his children. We heard a lot about his family members. I mean, when his testimonies were handed in from 2 of his sisters, his father, they were talking about his children and how they are going to grow up without their father. And it's at this point they were sort of discussing, there was another member of the family who had sort of basically collapsed as a result of the case and has fallen into addiction issues, or previously had addiction issues, and those have sort of reared their head again. And at this point he was very emotional, drying tears from his eyes and stuff like that. And it seemed like this sort of reminder to him almost of what he had done and I suppose the catastrophic impact that what he had done has had on his family, sort of really. And that was the only kind of time I'd seen emotion from him today.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the other side of that is that he was, while he didn't have a financial interest in the profits of the drug deal, he also was getting 150,000, which is a huge amount of money. We did know there was something going on, and it really was that money was the motivation. While he did speak about, once he got involved with these characters, Mr. X, that they were dangerous, and he became fully aware of that, he still got involved for, to make money, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. And as part of that as well, I mean, he had said that, he kind of just turned a blind eye to what was going on. He kind of didn't ask any questions. But he said that he didn't know that it was methamphetamine, he said, or how much there was in there or anything like that. As part of one of his Garda interviews, he said that he was told that it had been MDMA that was in it. But also we heard about the CCTV stills from the garden centre, and there was sort of footage of Mr. X meeting with Mr. McDonnell within the garden centre. And there is footage from the 7th of February 2024 that shows Mr. X sort of standing over Nathan McDonnell, and it's described that they're spending about 7 to 8 minutes doing clerical admin work on the computer. And it's described that this Mr. X was physically and, metaphorically kind of standing over him, watching him, kind of almost forcing him to do it. And it was described in mitigation that he was fearful of this man, and he did what he did because he was trying to protect his family as well.
Yeah, he speaks about his reputation never being rehabilitated. It certainly has been a massive fall from grace from where he was. So did they set a date for when this would be finalised, or did they, obviously Nathan McDonnell now has been in prison, is it a year or so already? They didn't give any indication about length of term or anything like that. The judges, they just put it off for a couple of weeks, or?
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose in mitigation, Mr. Roman did sort of cite a couple of different cases similar to this one, where various ones, so there was guilty pleas, or there was family ties that had been deeply affected by somebody being imprisoned, and sort of giving, I suppose, the judges these different cases to consider in their own decision. So one of them, while he said, I don't expect him to get a suspended sentence, but it's just because it's a similar case, I'm going to pass this to you. But also in another one, he said, this person got 22 years, but I'm still going to pass this to you as well for your consideration as part of the sentencing. So it looks like the judges did ask at the end because of course it's a three-judge court, and they'll be the ones deciding the sentence. They had asked for information regarding where his businesses stand, and their wording was they want to know whether or not he would have a business to return to run when he does leave prison and he has completed a sentence. He also mentioned that he is keen to look forward to the future and work on reuniting with his sons in the future. And it was said that, it was understood that they may be teenagers by this point, at that point when he's able to reunite with them, but he wanted to kind of make a valuable contribution to them as they enter their formative years. So it has been listed again for mention on next Monday, so in a week's time, and that is when I suppose those more details around his businesses will be given to the judges. And at that point, they did say they would hope to sentence him before the end of the month. So I don't know whether that's going to happen or not next Monday, or they may postpone again to another date.
Yeah, but it's not long, and it's incredible. It's all done and dusted within a year, which is certainly rare with these things that can flow through the courts for a long time. Okay, Clodagh, we'll definitely come back to it next week.
Thanks, Niall.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.